Welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Albert Chiu. U.S. Air Force General Michael Minihan's internal documents this year proposed 2025 as a potential D-Day for a potential Taiwan Strait crisis, featuring a large-scale PLA landing. However, retired Taiwanese generals' recent war games suggest an alternate outlook. We will delve into these fresh insights today. Joining us today are Stephen Tan, Managing Director of International Policy Advisory Group, and Kuo Yu-jen, Professor and Director of Institutes of China and Asia Pacific Studies at the National Yat-sen University. He's also the Vice President of Institutes for National Policy Research. A very warm welcome to both on the show. This Taiwanese civilian war game report counters U.S. simulations by claiming that geographical and infrastructural factors like the Western Maritime Area's landscape and wind farms render an amphibious invasion with 100,000 troops impractical, highlighting a potential gap in U.S. war game assumptions. So, Professor Kuo, so what is the overall interpretation of the war game from General Chen Yongkang?
First of all, I have to say that different war games having very different basic assumptions of their scenario, different scenarios. From U.S. war games to our best knowledge, it is from the standpoint that the U.S. forces will be coming to rescue Taiwan or to give military assistance, either from Okinawa or from the mainland of the states. So U.S. war game, the major target is to understand the U.S. forces preparation to carry out such a mission. Their lack of preparation, weaknesses, and also equipments and deployments and trainings. But General Chen Yongkang's war game stands at very different position from the U.S. war games. It is more like from domestic situation or domestic preparation from invasion from Taiwan's standpoint. So General Chen Yongkang's war game is not 100% military, as himself also emphasized that they only spend like roughly about 30% of the time on military war game. The rest of 70% is on more like defense resilience discussion and gaming. So it is unfair to comment which one is right or which one is wrong or which perspective is more appropriate, which is not. So my response to that will be it's very different perspective war games.
Okay, Professor Kuo, you just mentioned that the war game conducted by Chen Yongkang was not 100% military, right? So just to our audience or to people who are not familiar with the war game play, is it reasonable to take into account political factors when play a game such like this?
Overall, I believe General Chen Yongkang's war game this time, his so-called civilian war game, is in terms of scope, it is too big because it's further discussing even on like energy supply, supply chain, on medical preparation.
Very broad.
Very broad. And to my best knowledge, it's only a 2 days war game. 2 days is definitely not enough.
Too short for so much information to digest.
Every single theme of General Chen Yongkang's war game could be played for 2-3 days. And they have 8 main themes. Yeah, so I believe it is too broad as a war game. Yeah.
Stephen, so what's your take, what's your observation of this war game? Firstly, conducted by Taiwanese civilians, even though he was a general in Taiwan.
Well, first of all, for the audience who may or may not be that familiar with the meaning or the purpose of the war games, allow me just to say a few things. Number one, the purpose of the war game is not to predict or forecast the outcome of the scenarios that's being set forth or the premises that's being set forth for the war game. The underlying purpose of the war game is really to come out under the certain assumptions and scenarios to try to find out the deficiencies or the things that we can improve or things that might be perceived to be missing. So because of that, how to set up the parameters and the assumptions and the premises of a war game is significantly important. Now, if you look at this, I agree. This war game that we are to talk about is pretty much focusing on the resilience and the domestic readiness. It may be overly too broad, then I think it's debatable as to whether some of those factors have been fully covered. I think there is a merit to that, in terms of the, if we look at this from the domestic perspective, in the scenarios that's being preset by the organizers of the war game, which is the military attack by China in 2027, on whether or not we're ready and what the deficiencies are. So I think for those who participated or otherwise monitored the activities of the war game in that 2 days in July this year, I think there are certain elements that I think that deserve further exploration.
Okay. All right. We later on we talk about we as a Taiwanese what we should do regarding prevent PLA attack. But also I still want to kind of delve deeper into the war game scenario. Actually, in this war game conducted by General Chen Yongkang, talk about the electricity blackout. The war game suggests that a PLA strike could disable Taiwan's essential infrastructure, potentially leading up to a 72 to 96 hour blackout for both military but also the civilian sectors. So, Professor Kuo, so what's your suggestion if this has some kind of truth to it? Are we going to be worried about this, or what kind of preparation should we have?
I have to emphasize that since General Chen Yongkang mentioned that 70% of the war gaming is spending on domestic resilience or defense resilience, I have to say that those 70% suggestions bear from the war game. This particular war game is we knew it already. I mean, without this war gaming, including energy supply, the blackout you just mentioned, 42% of Taiwan's energy coming from coal, and it will be run out in 40 to 42 days if China blockade Taiwan, as the war game played. And 39% of natural gas will be run out in 14 days. And we only, nuclear energy only occupy 8% of Taiwan's overall energy supply. And we all know that, even without this particular war game. And then this war gaming also talking about medical preparation. No single country's medical system is designed for war. So these war games conclusion, there will be 20,000 to 100,000 soldier casualties. And Taiwan basically doesn't have that kind of medical capacity to handle that big amount of casualty. That is also true for every single country in the world.
Not only in Taiwan.
Not only in Taiwan. So if you take Taiwan's landscape into consideration, this particular war game also mentioned that Taiwan's overall power networking concentrating on 3 major stations. We cannot change our landscape. So that's how our power supply networking was designed to match Taiwan's natural landscapes. Yeah. So of course we could, beforehand we could enhance or try to strengthen our critical infrastructure protection, but you cannot solve that fundamentally fragile situation of Taiwan's energy supply at all. If suffer from, for example, PLA's missile attack or airstrike, I mean, blackout for 36 to 72 hours, I think it is a very small number.
Right, but I also wonder, isn't the Taiwanese military has the capability of retaliating, right? Airstrike or missile attacks against China, mainland China itself. Is it possible, or only we are, in the side, we only can receive their attack instead of revenge?
That is also one of the major difference between U.S. or U.S.-Japan wargaming and General Chen Yong-kang's wargaming this time. The U.S. wargaming focusing on military only, so it is a two-way street between U.S. forces and PLA. But General Chen Yong-kang's wargaming is only single-way street.
Okay.
Taiwan, what Chen Yong-kang is trying to do is to test Taiwan's resilience suffering from overall scale of PLA's invasion. So the wargaming basically didn't calculate the possibility or the impact from Taiwan's military's counter-strike to PLA or to PLA bases along the coast, in southwestern coast of China. So I have to say this single-sided kind of wargaming. Again, I have to emphasize a lot of the conclusion and answers we already know before this particular wargaming. Yeah.
Okay, Stephen, do you want to add up to this?
Well, I think again, different assumptions of the war game will come up with the different scenarios leading to different forms and shapes. So I wouldn't compare too much between A and B, because it's just like comparing apples and oranges. But I would emphasize or re-emphasize again that if we are to seek improvements or to make up the deficiencies, what are those deficiencies that we can identify and try to seek and find ways to improve? I think that's of more relevance. I agree that some of the issues that we already know. If it's more on the psychological aspect as to whether the society as a whole is ready, and I think there is a lot of state building that we have to work hard on, and some of the factors that have been there that I agree we already know, but the next step is not to microanalyze the process and even the recommendations as a result of the said war game, but more to throughout the process of state building to build up a stronger sense to see what do we have and what are we missing.
Stephen, actually the war game pulls insights from specialists, not only from military industry, but also across different sectors. For example, semiconductors, shipping. Even though that one of the limitations you guys mentioned might be the limitation on the war game is that it's too broad. It's rarely focused or specialized in the military dimension. But still, maybe our audience would be still curious about if we talk about, say, semiconductors, shipping. People used to call Taiwan as a silicon shield that it really guarantees the safety of Taiwan, relies on Taiwan's prosperity in this industry to attract international assistance. You first, would you still say that the semiconductors is still a guarantee for Taiwan security?
No, I've always had a problem with this term, silicon shield, as if there is something that can, protect us or prevent from the occurrence of any threat or coercion. No, I think as I just mentioned earlier, the state building requires lots of things. Technology and the strengthening technology is definitely a big part of it. But we as a whole, cannot simply rely on the strength of semiconductor as a certain critical, but only part of the technology to protect us. I think what's been protecting us is really ourselves, 23.5 million people here as a community. Now, we build up our strength militarily, but also the socially and psychological aspect, and then we work very closely with like-minded countries to our own defense and then working with others. Simply relying on semiconductor as a critical technology to be the shield, quote unquote, is something that is impractical, unrealistic, and doesn't seem to make a lot of sense from the nation building's perspective. So I've long been advocating for not continuing to use that term or phrase as silicon shield because this is simply not the case, and we can't just rely on semiconductor as our protection.
Professor Kuo, do you agree with this analysis?
Steve knew that long ago. Silicon shield is insufficient to protect Taiwan, even without this wargaming again. And I also have to emphasize semiconductor is just one of the element to protect Taiwan, but it is insufficient to protect Taiwan as a whole. Yeah, so it is just one of the matter might trigger higher attention from the international community to Taiwan, and also international intervention to possible Taiwan contingency. And in addition, I have to emphasize the second thing, which is very vital, very critically important, but was not played within this particular wargaming, is economic sanction.
Economic sanction
from international community. If we look at Ukraine war, lots of people tend to believe economic sanction basically didn't stop war in Ukraine. Yeah, but if you look at how Putin is seeking for support from North Korea, then you will know the critical role of economic sanction, the damage and the impact it caused to Russia. Economic sanction might not stop war, but it could largely slow down the progress of war.
Okay.
So, put it simple, if without this very powerful economic sanction from international community to impose on Russia, today's Ukraine war situation might be very different. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know why on this particular wargaming they did not take
economic sanction.
Economic sanction into consideration. Yeah.
I think that's very intriguing. Think about the experience of Ukrainian war. The economic sanction was imposed on Russia at the quite early stage of the war, right? As we remember back to February last year. And there was a lot of debates regarding how effective that economic sanction was about, and including cutting off the monetary communication between the West and also the Russia, and a lot of items or a lot of trades was kind of cut off from the Western societies. But I also wonder, maybe Professor Kuo, could you kind of elaborate more a bit, according to your own observation or maybe simulation, that if there is a war or outbreak between Taiwan and China, how would the economic sanction play, in influence the whole dynamic, and how early was it gonna be, or will it be gonna be implemented by the Western societies?
Okay. Again, I had to focus on, how this particular wargaming play out, because that's the main theme today.
Right.
I have to re-emphasize again, this wargaming is a very one-way street, very one-sided, because it didn't take international sanction into consideration, and it didn't take Taiwan's military counter-strike and the damage it might cause into consideration, and it didn't take China's domestic or internal dynamic during the invasion into consideration. And that is very one-sided. I have to re-emphasize that again. And to my best knowledge, being traveling to the States, to Japan, Korea, and many countries in Europe, European countries are pretty much ready and prepared. They do have a scenario if China really does invade Taiwan. They do have planned scenario to lay out before before the actual invasion happens. So they will use that as the main measure to deter China to do unwise thing.
Does that include economic sanction?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Mainly economic sanction. Yeah.
Mainly. Okay.
Mainly economic sanction. And if you take trade relation, China with the States, China and Europe, China and Japan into consideration, then you will understand how large the damage will be caused to China than to Russia.
Right. Compared with Russia, I think
Exactly.
China is even more heavily dependent on the trade relations.
Exactly, yeah.
With the external world.
Yeah.
Okay, Stephen, I have a different question for you. The host of the simulation, Chen Yongkang, the general, he said, we are not afraid of the Chinese side seeing the results of the simulation. Perhaps some people would argue that this particular war game is less optimistic than the other war games conducted by the Western countries. Only because when they see it, where they realize that many assumptions do not necessarily match the actual situation, make the use of the force the least wise option. So do you think that Beijing now is still overly optimistic about attacking Taiwan? How likely they think they will win the war?
I can't read through the crystal ball as to whether or not Beijing is overly optimistic about the current situation or in the years to come as to vis-a-vis Beijing's relationship with Taipei. But I know that it's the combination of multiple deterrents and the assurance and the reassurance of maintaining the status quo that we can possibly do working with like-minded countries to try to reinforce our overall resilience in and out of Taiwan, and that's what matters. I don't think Beijing will read any war game in terms of in its process or internalizing the decision making as to whether or when and how to attack Taiwan or exercise any form of coercion or using any other peaceful or non-peaceful means of unifications. So I don't think that comes into play. And I think what matters are a few things. Number one, the ever-changing dynamic international relations between China and the rest of the world. Number two, Xi Jinping and CCP and also the overall Chinese society, to what extent it will continue to be stable or unstable, and the economic developments and the economic situations. So those are the key factors that determine what Xi Jinping really has in mind and what are the dynamic factors that will come into play between now and a few years later. And I think that seems to be more important than the process or the recommendations of any war game, including this one.
Okay, all right, great. Let's kind of move our attention a bit to the United States. Mike Gallagher, as you know, the chair of the U.S. House China Task Force, he actually pointed out that moving supply chains out of China and cut off capital to China's key sectors can help resolve the future crisis. So Professor Kuo, what's your comments on this? If the U.S. is determined to continue to cut off trade connection to China, even move out the supply chains from China, does that help to Taiwan security?
What Gallagher emphasized is just repeating from the national security strategy from the U.S. Last year, October 12th. That particular report emphasized 6 technologies that the U.S. shouldn't allow China to have any opportunity to suppress the U.S. or the U.S. allies. Number 1, of course, is semiconductor. Number 2 is AI. Number 3 is advanced communication, which is 6G from low Earth orbit satellites. Number 4 is quantum computing. Number 5 is biotech. And number 6 is clean energy. So if you read this report last year, you will understand what Mike Gallagher tried to emphasize, that this is technology war between the U.S. and China is really the critical key to our international relation landscape. So I would believe, especially Taiwan plays vital roles in 3 out of these 6 critical technologies.
Okay, Professor Kuo, Stephen, thank you for the insightful analysis. Taiwan's security is crucial not only to Taiwan itself, but also to the world. In this episode, we discussed the differences between Taiwan's military simulations and those conducted by foreign entities. We also delved into China's domestic factors and their impact on Taiwan's security. Do you like our show? Leave us a message and subscribe to Taiwan Talks. See you soon.